Hello and welcome. Thank you for listening. Thank you for downloading. I'm Lisa Leitner, and welcome to my simple little podcast about IEPs, or as the case may be today, my simple little podcast about IEPs and 504s, which is what we're going to talk about today. First of all, let me just address the elephant in the room as far as, of course, the U.S. Department of Education being dismantled, which oversees IDEA. The lawsuit, which we haven't heard about in a few weeks, the lawsuit that, I don't know, what was it, like a dozen state attorneys general filed to remove Section 504. And what was the third part? Oh, the firing of a lot of OCR, Office of Civil Rights, which of course protects our kids' civil rights in public education, but in particular firing at least half of the attorneys who investigate OCR complaints. So briefly, I just want to say this, and that is all of this stuff has to go through the courts. And he can sign all the executive orders he wants. They can fire all the people they want. But what we are finding is that a few weeks later, many of these people are being brought back after it goes to court, and these federal judges, and mind you, some of these judges were appointed by one of the George Bushes and so on. These are not just, and some were appointed by him in his last term. So this is not just Democratic judges, because, it's all political, it's just a Democratic judge. No, some of these judges were appointed by Republicans. But anyway, they are reinstating many of these people and saying that you cannot just dismantle a department. Our Constitution says that Congress holds the checkbook and decides how money is spent. And if Congress establishes an agency, only Congress can dismantle an agency. That said, much of this is a huge disruption. I certainly acknowledge that. But I do think it's just a disruption. I think that we're going to prevail because that's what and they go, oh, he bought the Supreme Court, they're going to side with him. I think that people are underestimating the amount of ego that people on the Supreme Court have, and how, for lack of a better phrase, especially since we're talking about women and some of the Supreme Court justices are women, of course. But I think people aren't thinking about the possible pissing contest that could go on between the egos of him and the egos of the people on the Supreme Court, who can very easily exercise their authority and their stature and say, no, I'm a Supreme Court justice and you don't get to override what I say. So I think that piece of it is something that he hasn't considered when he picked these justices, that, again, to be on the Supreme Court requires a certain amount of ego. And they're not necessarily shrinking violets who are just going to go along with whatever he says. Anyway, so having HHS oversee IDEA, we're just going to have to see how that plays out. Because the other part of that is that, okay, we can talk about HHS overseeing IDEA, but then there's HHS that is maybe run by a normal, sane, knowledgeable person. And then there's HHS being run by this clown who has no experience. It's weird to me that he's undoing a lot of his family legacy. His family had a very strong legacy in disability rights and disability programming and Special Olympics and all that. the Kennedys have long been, at the foundation of that. And it's weird that he's just going to undo his own family legacy, but he is. Sorry, I'm starting to ramble. It's going to be a disruption. How it's going to play out, we don't know. The other piece is this. Two points I want to make. Our fights as far as IEP battles have always been at the state and local level anyway. When you file for mediation, when you file for due process, that is at your state level. When you have IEP meetings, that's at the local level, right? We haven't been fighting against the federal government in these issues and in these disputes anyway. It's always been at the state and local level. Now, we did have that layer of federal protection. If that goes away, like, what does that look like? I've thought about this a lot in recent weeks. And I'm going to talk about my privilege here a little bit. And that is, here in Pennsylvania, we had special education 3 or 4 years before IDEA. So if I'm in Pennsylvania, I'm not feeling as threatened. If I was in a deep red state that is terrible at special education and always has been, I would be a lot more concerned. I am concerned about the funding piece, even though full funding of IDEA has never happened. And in recent years, it's really been only about 10% and not 40%, but 10% is still significant. If you have the federal government chipping in 10% of what it costs to educate a disabled student, 10% is still a lot. And IEPs today, by and large, they are not, what's the word I'm looking for a word, and I'm not trying to insult teachers or schools, but we all know that kids' needs are not fully being met. We know that almost every kid in America has things that he or she needs that are not on their IEP, or they have things on their IEP that are not being done with fidelity. So what I'm saying is that we're not even doing a stellar job of it with every student now. So I would hate to see it be reduced by 10% because of federal funding cuts. If I had a younger child, I would be less worried than if I had an older child. Those of us who do have kids moving into the adult services realm, of course, that dope Elon Musk, he thinks that transition can only mean one thing and one thing only. And he has no idea what IEP transition is or what it means. And so he's gone ahead and cut I think he's cut all of those programs that were federally funded. So, if I had my child in one of those job training programs and it was cut, I'd be concerned, because now, your kid might be 17, 18, 19 years old. And what do you do? It's not likely that your school's going to come up with the money to pay for that program. And I've heard people say, yeah, but if it's on their IEP, they have to do it. You're right, they do. But I would be very curious to see some of the wording on the IEP and what that looks like. Because remember, IEPs are your child's FAPE on paper. And when you have an IEP dispute, so if the school tries to remove this program and put in something else, not only do you have to demonstrate what is FAPE for your child, you have to be able to demonstrate what is not, that what the school is offering is not FAPE for your child. So anyway, and of course, with OCR being gone, the backlog of complaints for OCR complaints is going to be tremendous. So all that brings us to, which is better, an IEP or a 504? Where to start? Right now, it feels like you have very little recourse with Section 504 plans. That is an area where I would be concerned, not because I think Section 504 is going away, but because one of your main options for recourse is to file an OCR complaint. And if they just fired all the attorneys, those attorneys have not been fired or hired back yet, have not been ordered to be hired back yet from courts. So we're going to have to see how that plays out. And I know that I have a lot of friends who are filing OCR complaints even now, and they're certainly still filing them. But they have not heard a thing. Here in Philadelphia, they closed the OCR office. I know they closed it in Dallas. So the other piece is that when it comes to 504 plans, schools can develop them and change them without parental input. So that's important. Obviously, you do not have the same set of parental rights with a 504 plan as you do with an IEP. The main difference between IEPs and 504s is an IEP is special education, a 504 is accommodations. So a 504 is not going to have goals, it's not going to have progress monitoring. There is an evaluation process. It's much less comprehensive. It doesn't have the strict timelines. And again, it's accommodations or things that your child needs just to access their education. Special education is not provided with a 504 plan in most cases, right? And of course, there are goals. There's supposed to be specially designed instruction, and that is the specific interventions that your child needs, the special education that they need to achieve those goals. So they're both legally binding documents. They both have procedures in place if you disagree. 504 plans actually do have a due process for parents. So people go, oh, an IEP is better, but not every kid needs special education. Not every disabled child needs special education. Some truly only need accommodations to access their education. And that's fine. You're going to have to stay on them to make sure that it's implemented. I would look for tricky wording in accommodations. And I mean this for IEPs and 504s. And I see a lot of accommodations that say the student will have access to the resource room to take tests, or the student will have access to this. Having access to something and actually getting it as an accommodation are two different things. So I hear a lot of things not happening for kids. And then when the parent questions the school, they go, oh, well, he never asked for it. He never said he wanted it. He never said he wanted to go to the resource room to do his test. He never said he wanted extra time. So just make sure that those types of details are explicit in your IEP or your 504 so that it happens. Make sure that if your child has an IEP, that they are in fact receiving special education and not just accommodations, because I see a lot of IEPs that have nothing more than a bunch of accommodations. Okay. It's the specially designed instruction, and that includes the related services. What else? Just a reminder that there are no have tos when it comes to 504 plans. And what I mean by that is I hear a lot of, oh, we have to move him to a 504 because, or he's a senior in high school, so he has to move to a 504 for college. And that's just not true. There are no have tos as far as a 504 unless the child no longer qualifies for special education. So evaluations need to be done. When your child goes to college, if your child goes to college, when they go to college, they have to start the 504 process over anyway. Having a 504 or an IEP in high school is a good foundation, and it's a good reference document to take to that disability office at the college to say, hey, these are the types of accommodations I had in high school. These are the types of accommodations I need to be successful at college. But you do not need to walk in the door at college and say, here's my 504 and implement it. That's not how it works. A child can graduate from high school and on graduation day still have an IEP, and in college get a 504 plan. There is no, we have to, which is just, I don't know. And I've heard everything from like, oh, you have to have a 504 because you have passing grades now, or you have to have a 504 or a college won't accept you. And like, no, there's, anytime I hear something that I don't agree with, just ask them to point it out. Say, really? I've never read that. I've never heard that. Can you show me where it says that? And chances are they will not be able to come up with that documentation. So that's a good little trick to have in your back pocket. So which is better, an IEP or a 504? I mean, again, that's going to be up to the family. They both have the same purpose. It's for both an IEP and a 504. It's about children, students getting what they need, disabled students getting what they need to be successful. And both are legally backed. Both are formal, legally binding documents. It's just that an IEP just kind of feels tighter. It has that reevaluation piece to it. Of course, it's best practice to relook at your 504 plan annually, but it's not required. It's not required like it is with an IEP. So I hope that you all can make the best decision that you can. I do not expect Section 504 to be going away anytime soon. Remember, there is a lot of positivity and joy out there in the world. There are a lot of people fighting for this. I hope that you will join them in the fight, because it's not just about access at school. It's about access in the workplace. It's about access in your community. It's about things that doctors and hospitals have to provide for disabled people. Section 504 is not just about school. It's about access. And I do not expect the people who fought for Section 504, which of course was passed in 1973, it was not implemented with fidelity or at all for the first several years until in 1977 with the 504 sit-ins, when disabled people kind of like demanded that it be implemented. But those people are still alive and living and walking amongst us today, right? This is not ancient history. These people are all still alive, these people who made it happen, many of them. And I do not expect that. I just don't expect that we're going back. I don't think we're going back. We have to remember that when Section 504 and IDEA was passed, that we were still really in the throes of institutionalization, and that we did not see disabled people in our community, right? Like I'm a Gen Xer, and I distinctly remember as a kid, like when I think back, like we didn't see disabled people a lot, where they were kept hidden. And that has not been the case for the past 20 or 25 years. And so I don't expect us to go back. I don't think that like, oh, okay, well, now we've been out in the community. While we still have a long way to go, we've been out in the community, and we're welcome places and amusement parks and shopping centers and all that and sporting events. And now all of a sudden you want to shove me back home again or in an institution. Like I just don't see that happening. But it's also not something we should take for granted. So please join a resistance movement in your area. Connect with disability groups in your area and join the protests, join their lobbying efforts, because it is important. Our rights are under attack. And yeah, hang in there. Hang in there. We made it through 2 months, more than 2 months. We're going to make it through this. We're going to make it through this. There's a lot going on that's in our favor. The elections, the special elections that have happened, a lot of those have been favorable. There's just a lot going on that we have reason to be happy. When you look at the disapproval ratings and things like that, more people feel the way we do and are not in agreement with what's been going on because nothing positive has happened yet. We can, well, wait and see. It's going to be better. When? You've had 10 weeks. Like, when? Like, how much longer do we have to wait? People are tired of waiting. Costs are not coming down, stuff like that. So it feels very isolating. It feels like you could lose your rights or your child's rights when it comes to IDEA and Section 504. But again, I think this is going to be a disruption. I think it's something that we have to fight for, but in no way do I think this is permanent. So keep your chin up, find something to be grateful for each day, find some joy in each day, and I will talk to you next week. And I will put links in the show notes of things that I talked about today.